Well, howdy there, stranger. I'm Jordy,
And I'm Brad.
and welcome back to Beers with Queers, the true crime podcast where I research a case, and Brad here, and potentially you guys.
Don't know a damn thing about it.
So we are officially in the midst of Pride, y'all. Happy Pride.
Happy Pride.
Hopefully it's been an amazing Pride so far. Hopefully you guys have been extra gay this holiday season. I know we have. We just got back. You probably saw it on our socials. We just got back from seeing Trixie Mattel in Nashville at her Solid Pink Disco. You know, that's always a fun time. It was so amazing. Thank you again to Trixie and DJ Matteo Sagatti for inviting us back, having us. It was such a wonderful experience. We got solid pink tuxedos to wear for it.
We got the VIP treatment again. We kind of had our own little box to watch the show. And honestly, standing out on Trixie Mattel's balcony while she did her eyebrows, just chatting, I was like, how the hell did we get here?
Yeah, it's a weird it's a weird thing, but you know, it's one of those things where it's like, what series of events led me to this very moment? It was a very fun experience. The tuxedos were a hit. We went out to play afterwards, still dressed in the tuxedos, and we either got one of two things. We got either you guys just left a wedding or you left prom, and both of you look a little too old to be a prom, which, how very dare you? I know plenty of high school seniors that had beards. Thank you very much.
And he's not just talking about the women who went with them to prom.
That's true, actually.
A beard.
Yeah, a beard.
Hey, not all our listeners will know what a beard is.
So for those of you who don't know, your Pride history lesson of the week is a beard is, you know, when you're in school usually, and it's a gay man and normally a woman who sometimes is in on it, sometimes is not in on it. He dates her, they pretend to be dating, so, you know, suspicion is thrown off of him, so no one suspects that he's gay. 9 times out of 10, they still do, and it is kind of fun. It's funny when they're in on it. It's not funny when they're not in on it because
No, it is not funny when they're not in on it.
that happens quite a bit. But yeah,
It sucks really bad for the women that are beards and they are also wives and they're not in on it.
and mothers. They are wives and mothers, and their husband is a big old homosexual.
I'm not throwing any shade out there to anybody that's in that situation because life is very hard and sometimes we don't end up where we would like to be. We end up where society puts us.
And that's true. You know, we don't judge anybody, different circumstances for different people. But yeah, the suits were a hit. And also, it was really hot. So imagine wearing a full 3-piece suit in the middle of a dance club. And we were there for like almost 3 hours. And it was still a fun experience. But by the end of it, I was like, get this off of me.
I will say, like, the whole Trixie Mattel show was amazing. It was even better than last year, which was kind of hard to top. Last year, it was a dance party and just a rave. This one actually kind of had some show aspects to it. It was really, really good. And again, I just want to say Trixie and DJ Mateo were so nice the entire time. All those people out there that are Trixie fans, it is warranted. Like, Trixie is like a person that definitely doesn't forget where she came from. You know, sometimes when people reach that level of stardom, it kind of changes them. But no, I mean, very nice. But honestly, one of the highlights of my evening was in those 3-piece pink tuxedos, walking into a White Castle at 2:00 in the morning.
Yeah, so the play was close enough downtown Nashville that we just decided to walk there. It was through a less than savory part of the neighborhood, but there was a big old White Castle along the way, and I was hungry. And so I was like, oh, let's just stop here. I've not eaten at a White Castle in probably 15 years. Last time we ate there was visiting my uncle in prison in like the 3rd grade. So we went there, ate some. It was filled with nostalgia. It was just as greasy, just as deliciously disgusting as I remember it to be. And thankfully, it didn't hamper my spirits at the club afterwards, because that is always a possibility when you are dealing with that greasy of food.
Here we call them gut bombs. I'm not sure what they're called in other places, but they often live up to their name.
They do. And so, yeah, it was an amazing weekend. It was so much fun. It was a great way to kick off Pride.
It was literally the first day of Pride. Well, it was the day before that ran into the first day of Pride.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah. So, first day of Pride, so it was a great way to kick it off. And it's just the beginning because, as you guys know, we have a long list of things lined up for this Pride. This weekend, I think we have free, which is just a catch-up weekend.
And when he says free, that means I'm actually going to seed the lawn, fix some of the gutters, and actually do all the stuff that I should be doing while we're running around. So,
Yep. It's time to be an adult for just one weekend. And then after that, it's Winston-Salem Pride. And then after that, it's
South Knox Pride after that.
Sono Pride. And then the big finale to close out Pride Month is Nashville Pride. So it's going to be a very...
And this year, we are going to be walking in the Nashville Pride Parade. Actually, we'll have my new Bronco there. His name's Cletus. So you should see us with our little banner. And if you get any pictures of us, send them our way. We'll put them in our social media.
Yeah. And so, yeah, it's just going to be a great Pride. Great way to kick off the start of Pride. And, yeah, hopefully you guys are having fun. Hopefully you guys are being safe and making smart choices. And thank you for celebrating Pride with us. So it's going to be a really fun-filled and busy Pride Month for us, as well as hopefully you guys, as we get out there and spread as much fun and joy as we can. Hopefully you guys are also having a wonderful and eventful Pride, and hopefully, despite the challenges the queer community still face, we can make this the best Pride yet. But, as you may have already guessed from the title of this episode, we got to get serious for a bit because today's episode is going to be covering a very tough topic. And I'm sure you guessed by the title of the episode. While Pride is a time to be open and celebrate and be proud of our queerness, the fun of the festivities can sometimes make us forget that Pride isn't just about parties and floats. It's about celebrating our future and, more importantly, celebrating and remembering our past and all of those who came before us. It's no secret that it has been a long, emotional, and treacherous journey for the queer community to get to where we are today. And sadly, even then, we've made great strides, but we still have a long fight ahead of us. This is a time to remember those who gave us the rights we have in the first place, our queer siblings, trans women of color, gender nonconforming queens, and those just not afraid to stand up and shout, "Enough is enough." This is a time to remember all those we lost during the AIDS crisis, all the potential, the dreamers, the poets, and to the thousands of people whose journeys were cut too short. Now, while it's important to look at the bright side of things and the community, that's above all else. You have to remember the goodness in the world and the community as a whole. We're all in this together. We also need to remember the more tragic events in our history, and today we're not only going to talk about one of the most tragic, but also one that is still very fresh and raw in the hearts of the entire community. This week, on June 12th, it will mark the 9th anniversary of one of the darkest chapters in queer history, the Pulse nightclub massacre that occurred on June 12th, 2016, claiming the lives of 49 innocent people in what would become the worst attack on the community in American history. The Pulse shooting shook us to our core and reminded us that even in the spaces meant just for us, we're not always safe. So, this week we remember the 49 innocent lives lost to a senseless act of violence and come together as a community during Pride Month to help one another feel loved, safe, and remembered. Now, I won't be going into too graphic details or anything like that. I don't want this to be like sensationalism or gratuitous in any way. It is at the heart about community. So, we will get through this episode together, if you can trust me to handle it as carefully as possible. But also, I get it if you need to take a break maybe this week. It is a really tough, it's also a really triggering topic for a lot of people, especially during Pride Month. So I get it. Like I said, if you trust me to take you on this journey through a very dark part of our history, I think it'll, I don't know, cathartic in a way. It's always good to remember what happened in the past so it doesn't happen in the future.
It's very important to look at the past, not only the good stuff, but the bad stuff too, because we learn from that probably more than we learn from the good stuff.
We do. And also, like I said, at the heart of this episode, it is about community and it is about 49 people who lost their lives way too soon. Like I said, dreamers, poets, teenagers lost their lives. And so it's just really about remembering them, especially in the middle of Pride Month, and just making sure they're never forgotten. So to start off, first things first, I do want to ask, do you remember where you were when you first heard about Pulse Brad?
I remember it coming on the news. I don't remember exactly where I was, but like I remember it coming on the news and just like it just blew my mind. That could happen at a place like a club where everybody was supposed to be having fun and that many people to die that quickly.
And yeah, that's true. It happened, and by dawn, it was all over the news, all over the world. I personally remember being out on a small hike at a local nature center with a friend when I first found out about it, when I got back to my car and looked at my phone. I was a fresh, baby-faced 19-year-old, and I had literally just gone out to my first gay bar the weekend before. So, I think we all remember our first experience with a gay bar. It's like walking into Willy Wonka's chocolate factory almost, where it's like, whoa. You spend your whole life thinking you're the only gay person, especially if you're from a small town, or maybe you only knew one or two, or those that you saw on TV, and it just seems so far away. But then you step into your first queer space. It doesn't even have to be a bar. And suddenly you're surrounded by dozens of people just like you, laughing, socializing, and just being visibly queer. It's such a magical feeling that you can only really experience a handful of times, for the first time.
It's a very normalizing feeling.
It's literally like, oh, wow, there are others, there are rainbow flags, there are people who can be flamboyant and as boisterous and as authentically themselves as they want to be, and they're safe here. This is a safe space for them to do that and to meet other people like that. And that actually leads me into one of my biggest points that I always like to hammer home, which is the importance of gay bars. You know, it's not just bar. It's not just a bar. It's not just a place you go to drink. For over a century, gay bars were a hub to foster community. One of the only places where queer people could go to get away from the harassment, meet other people like them. And so, bars hold a special place for the queer community that if you're not a part of it, it's really kind of hard to understand.
They were also a rallying point. They done things for during the AIDS crisis to help people. Gay bars are very much, it's like the heart of a community.
It really is. And sadly, in the digital age, as we get dating apps like Grindr and social media, sadly a lot of gay bars are dying. And it's really sad to see because, for so long, and I think still, gay bars play a very important role in the queer community. And that's all I'm going to say about that because I actually plan on doing a whole episode going over the importance of gay bars soon. But almost immediately after I experienced this euphoria for the first time, I was shattered to learn that a shooting had occurred at a popular gay bar in Orlando, Florida. The sinking feeling of dread only continued to grow as the news announced more and more victims were being brought out of the club. Hearing that 49 people had been gunned down in cold blood was just such a shock to the system. And, even back then, as a, fresh baby-faced gay still in the scene, I knew the impact was going to be immeasurable. Since then, I honestly avoided researching too much into the events surrounding the shooting, as I knew right off the bat it was just going to make me so afraid and so terrified to ever go out again. But as I've gotten older and the more we've done this podcast, the more I realize how important it is not to approach tragedies like this with fear, but with, for lack of a better word, curiosity to ensure that it doesn't happen again.
And I'm going to admit, I was like Jordy on this. Like, this is going to be, I know about Pulse. I watched the headlines and everything like that, and I saw some of the pictures, and that's when I was like, I can't. I can't do this. I can't look into this deeper because it's going to literally shatter me, you know. I mean, you guys know I'm emotional.
I was about to say, even me, I actually started tearing up writing about it and researching it. So if that got me like that, God only knows how Brad would have reacted because it was rough just reading about the survivor testimonies and some of the details and some of the text messages that were sent out. It really reminded me of like 9/11 when they released the phone calls made from the planes before they crashed and people calling their loved ones and just being like, like, "Oh, I'm gonna be okay. Hopefully I'll see you soon," but they won't see them soon. Ooh, literally it's a gut punch. So with that being said, let's get right into it. And I think the best place to start is going to be a history of the bar itself. The Pulse nightclub, a safe haven for thousands of queer people for over a decade up to this point. Now, Pulse was founded and opened its doors on July 2nd, 2004 by Barbara Palma and Ron Legler. The bar itself took its name from Barbara's brother John, who passed away in 1991 from AIDS. And in her words, the name Pulse represents John's pulse, and that signifies his heartbeat, and that he lives on through her and through the club. Now, from the very beginning, Barbara and Ron set out to do something different. Pulse wasn't just about to be another gay bar. It was going to be a community space. From the very beginning, Pulse became a central hub in Orlando, not just for the queer community, but for the entire area. Pulse hosted fundraisers and charity events for breast cancer awareness. They raised money for HIV and AIDS victims and research, hosted events to promote safe sex and HIV prevention, held rallies for immigration rights, and partnered with multiple local groups and organizations to bring support and aid to those in need. And I think, and it wasn't just queer people, it was other minority groups in the area. It was for everybody. It was mainly a queer space, but no one is going to be turned away for help. Now, this level of advocacy and involvement led to Pulse quickly becoming one of the most beloved and respected gay bars in the entire city of Orlando. On top of their amazing charity work, Pulse was also known for shining a spotlight on local talent above all else. From drag queens to artists to musicians, Pulse made it a point to make sure the local talent got their time to shine in the spotlight. They nurtured an all-is-welcome atmosphere, and that is one thing people who had the chance to experience Pulse will tell you. It truly was a space for everyone to feel like they mattered. And part of how the staff at Pulse made sure everyone felt like they mattered was by hosting special nights for different communities. A night that would be in celebration of different minorities from the trans to the black community, but none were as popular as Pulse's Latin Night to celebrate the Hispanic community. By 2016, 1/3 of the population of Orlando was Hispanic, and the city had the highest number of Puerto Rican citizens living on the mainland. The Latino community of Orlando faced many hardships and still do to this day, with the community being disproportionately affected by things such as poverty, a lack of resources to healthcare, and of course, discrimination. So that made spaces like Pulse not just desirable, but a necessity for many queer Latinos who had so few spaces to feel safe in. The popularity of Latin Night at Pulse was so large that it eventually became a weekly event and was by far the most popular night of the week. Now, one regular at Pulse, Chris Lozada, would describe Latin Night as, quote, the place to be. If you wanted to feel like you mattered, that's where you'd be. By 2016, Pulse was an iconic staple and became known as the gay bar to stop at whenever you passed through Orlando. It hosted countless famous drag queens and other celebrities who heard of how amazing it was. And by the time Saturday, June 11th, 2016 arrived, Pride Month was in full swing and Latin Night was underway. Hundreds of people gathered inside the bar, ready to laugh, mingle, and dance the night away to their favorite songs. And little did they know, or anyone for that matter, history was about to change forever. Throughout the night of June 11th and into the first few early morning hours of June 12th, the mood was happy and carefree as everything seemed to be going off without a hitch. Now, this proved to be one of the most crowded and successful Latin nights to date, and the energy was electric. And that, again, makes it all the more tragic. It just so happened He chose the one night that it was the most crowded it had ever been. There was dancing, there was drag shows featuring local queens and special guest Kenya Michaels from RuPaul's Drag Race. And I don't know if you remember who Kenya was. I think she was on season 4. She was on season 4, and she did a lip sync with Latrice Royale to "You Make Me Feel Like a Natural Woman." And it was very, very iconic, to say the least. Now, by the time 2 a.m. rolled around, the last call was sent out as the bar prepared to close for the night just 30 minutes later. So, all the way up throughout the whole night, the bar was going to be closed in 30 minutes. Everything was wrapping up perfectly, and everyone was celebrating another successful night at everyone's favorite gay bar. But sadly, that was all about to change. At approximately 2:02 a.m., gunfire would erupt inside a Pulse as bullets began to fly out into the crowd of at least 320 people still inside the building, 90% of them being of Latin descent. Now, at first, there was no panic, as many thought the loud popping noises they were hearing were either part of a song or were fireworks going off. But as people started to drop to the floor around them, what was truly happening began to sink in, and a wave of panic and fear swept through the crowd as everyone realized that someone was shooting at them. Pretty soon the music stopped as people immediately began diving to the floor and fleeing towards any exits they could find, causing the scene to erupt into chaos. By 2:09 a.m., the official Facebook page for Pulse posted a message stating, quote, "Everyone get out of Pulse and keep running." By 2:04 a.m., police officers had already begun arriving at the scene as the entire area was sectioned off and they began to set up a barricade. But despite the quick response, the horror of what was happening inside would not stop for 3 hours. Now, you will see, I know a lot of people compare police action with this case to that of the police action of the Uvalde school shooting, which is where cops wouldn't go in for hours and the guy was still inside shooting people. Now, immediately after the first few shots were fired, Officer Adam Grueller, an off-duty officer with the Orlando PD working an extra shift as security for the bar, saw the shooter gun down 2 patrons as they attempted to escape out of an emergency exit. He immediately shot at the gunman, who returned fire, realizing that his handgun was no match for the semi-automatic rifle wielded by the shooter. He called in backup, with almost a dozen officers arriving within the next 5 minutes. The officers began attempting to track the shooter's movements through the club from outside, returning fire whenever he appeared on the club's patio. Now, another bouncer working that night, a recently retired veteran of the Marine Corps named Imran Yusuf, bravely ran inside the building and over to several emergency exits that had been locked, unlocking them, and he allowed multiple other avenues for patrons to escape, and in total saved over 70 people's lives that night.
It's a hero.
He is a hero, and as you'll see in the story, there actually were a lot of heroes. And that's, again, one of the most tragic, but also one of the parts that I don't want to say love, but it just makes you realize, it makes you have faith in humanity, where it's like a lot of these people, and this all is happening within the span of less than 10 minutes. And even during all that chaos, there are people that are like, I'm going to help someone else. Now, within the first 5 minutes of entering Pulse, the shooter, later identified as 29-year-old Omar Mateen, had fired over 200 rounds. Following this, the full chaos of the situation was setting in as over 100 officers arrived at the scene within the first 30 minutes and surrounded the entire building, demanding Omar surrender. But he refused, and instead chose to barricade himself in the women's restroom, turning the shooting into a hostage situation for police, one that would go on for 3 hours. During which time, the killing didn't stop, as Omar had barricaded himself in the bathroom with almost 30 patrons. He continued to shoot every few minutes. Now, although the initial shooting lasted less than 10 minutes, the impact was devastating, as survivors would later describe the scene as being literal hell on earth. Following the initial shots ringing out and the nature of what was truly happening setting in, Pulse erupted with screams as panicked people began trying to escape any way they could. The power began to flicker on and off in the already dimly lit space, making it hard for people to see. Smoke from the gun going off so many times also hampered people's vision, as the smell of smoke and blood caused even more fear. People fell to the ground and were trampled, the injured unable to move. All the while, the shooter chased and stalked after groups of people attempting to flee all throughout the club. Survivors remembered glass shattering around them and pieces of the floor exploding like shrapnel when they were struck by the bullets. But despite the horror, One thing that was reported often was that even within the chaos, dozens of people stayed behind in attempts to help the injured left inside. One survivor, a man named Luis Ruiz, recalls how his leg became trapped in a metal grate after kicking it down to allow people to escape out of the blocked exit. Unable to escape himself, he resolved himself to the fact that he would die and spent his last moments calling his mom to tell her he loved her and that he was about to die before the phone went dead with a gunshot. However, something miraculous happened. A man appeared and dragged the injured Louise out of the club and carried him all the way to a nearby 7-Eleven before the two embraced tightly in a hug and the man ran off. To this day, Louise doesn't know who the man was, and nor has the man ever came forward. All Louise knows is that he was his angel that night. Another survivor, a young woman, reported that she was hiding behind the bar on the outside patio and she could hear the gunshots growing louder as the shooter was making his way outside. As she heard footsteps round the bar, she was sure it was the shooter. But instead, a man she had never met before appeared and picked her up in his arms and ran from the patio as the shooter shot at both of them. Both made it out alive without injury. And I actually wrote this in here. This is the part that really gets me, is that it really makes you believe in the good and humanity again. That even in the middle of this absolute hellscape, I can't imagine it. So many people put their lives on the line to rescue fellow strangers. And these are like people like, I didn't know who it was. It's like, I've never met before. Or it's like the man that carried the other man. He's like, we didn't know each other, but once we knew we were safe, we just embraced each other. And it's just one of those visceral things. And I think it's kind of hard to explain, where it's just like you experience this thing, and in that moment, you are just fellow human beings trying to survive this awful situation.
Literally fighting for your life.
Literally fighting for your life in a space that's supposed to be safe, and all within the span of a couple minutes. Now, by 2:18 a.m., a SWAT team had arrived and began making their way inside the building, firing at Omar as he ran and barricaded himself inside of the bathroom. Following this, officers were ordered to evacuate the building and a standoff would commence. Now, why this has been a hot topic of debate for years, with the official reasoning being that Omar threatened that he had a bomb with him. And so, I mean, you kind of got to take that seriously. I get it. But at the same time, a lot of people are like, 3 hours is a long time.
Especially while he's still actively killing people in those 3 hours.
Yes, and police initially released a statement where they were like, well, we didn't hear gunshots, and if he was still shooting people, we would have acted. But a later coroner would report that at least 5 of the victims had been shot and killed during the standoff. So it's one of those things we'll never truly know why. Whatever the reason, officers fled the building, but over the next hour began the slow process of attempting to rescue the injured from inside. The first responders at the scene reported what they initially saw, and it was heartbreaking. The floor of the club was lined with dozens of bodies, with one officer screaming out, "If you're alive, raise your hand," only for 3 or 4 hands to go up in a room of almost over 30. By this point, the only sound inside the club was the nonstop ringing of dozens of cell phones that were scattered across the club, all from people attempting to reach their loved ones. By 2:35, the injured and deceased had been evacuated, but more than 24 people remained trapped in the bathrooms and in the dressing room located close by. What followed would be a 3-hour standoff between Omar and officers, who even managed to get into contact with him over the phone. Omar himself would call 911 at 2:45 and state, quote, "It's me, I'm the shooter," before pledging his allegiance to ISIS, claiming the Boston Marathon bombers were his bros, and stating his motive was in retaliation for the U.S. bombing of Syria. Now, Omar was in contact with a hostage negotiator too on 3 separate occasions over the next several hours and made many claims, including that he was going to send the hostages out with bombs strapped to their chests. During this time, he even called his wife to tell her that he loved her and to watch the news, all the while tormenting those trapped inside the bathroom with him by shouting and threatening to kill them. By 3:58 a.m., officers outside decided that they were done waiting and began making plans to blast their way through the bathroom walls to get inside. Almost an hour would pass before they were successful, as at 5:07 a.m., SWAT officers officially blasted a hole in the wall big enough for survivors to escape and for them to enter. At 5:14, officers encountered Omar Mateen in the hallway between the 2 bathrooms, and he began to fire at them, and they fired back, shooting him dead. With that, the scene was cleared, and at 5:53 a.m., the Orlando PD confirmed that he was dead. They had begun the process of clearing the entire club. But although the shooter was dead, the nightmare was far from over. And as those trapped inside the bathrooms began to emerge from the now ruins of Pulse, the stories of what happened inside were told and were even more heartbreaking than one could imagine. The shooter had first entered the men's room where over a dozen survivors were hiding, most crammed inside of the bathroom stalls, attempting to keep quiet. One survivor recalls that he was hiding in the stall with at least a dozen others when the shooter entered and began laughing, later describing it as sounding like a literal cartoon villain. A survivor outside the stall was shot dead before the gunman began banging on the stall door, and despite their desperate pleas to just leave them alone and spare them, the gunman simply stated, quote, "I don't have a problem with black people," and then blindly began firing through the stall door, killing 2 and injuring many more. One victim killed was stated to have actually used his body as a shield to protect the woman behind him, saving her life. And again, goes back to this strangers protecting strangers, and it's just that natural. So you know it's a good person. It was their natural instinct to be like, let me put myself in the way to protect someone else. After leaving the men's room is when the gunman made his way over to the women's room where other patrons were hiding and continued to fire. Every so often, he would return to dead bodies and shoot at them wildly, with one woman later reporting that she only survived because she piled the bodies around her on top of herself. Others reported that they had pretended to be shot and played dead on the floor, with one even reporting that the gunman pressed a gun to his back, but for some reason didn't fire. But most heartbreaking of all of this was the revelations that multiple survivors and victims had been texting and communicating with loved ones throughout the whole ordeal. In total, over 600 calls would be made to 911 from the club that night, with many more being made to family members. The most infamous and tragic of these is the text messages between 30-year-old Eddie Justice and his mother. Eddie was one of the patrons that sought shelter in the bathrooms when the shooting began, and from there he texted his mother, quote, and this is the part where I started crying researching it. "Mommy, I love you. They are in the club shooting, trapped in the bathroom. Call the police. I'm gonna die." Eddie and his mother would text back and forth for almost 40 minutes before Eddie texted her, still in the bathroom, "He's coming. I'm gonna die." And Eddie would unfortunately be one of the 49 victims from that night.
Can you imagine being stuck there for hours and just literally waiting to die?
And that's the thing that, again, that gets me, and what makes this case so hard is it was people that, like, they were hiding and they could hear him getting closer as they're texting and calling their loved ones. And that's why I'm saying it's like, reminds me of like the 9/11 calls where it's like, I can hear him getting closer. There's nowhere to run. There's dead bodies all around me. And it's like, I don't know what to do except call my mom and tell her I love her. And you can't even imagine like the family members of those, you're asleep. It's 3 in the morning and you get this call and it's your child who's just telling you like there's someone here killing everybody, and just the confusion and the terror that has to be is just so unimaginable.
And 3 hours of terror. That's what gets me. It's way after the adrenaline has had to run off because adrenaline can't keep up forever. You're still in this terror, like a nightmare situation for hours. It's unbelievable.
It is, and that's what also survivors described. They were in the bathroom with him for hours. He had conversations with them. He sat there. They were like, at times, sometimes he would go quiet and then he would like sing to himself and then he would like check his face in the mirror and wash his hands. All the while we're cowering in the corner. And every so often he would like ask us a question. We'd ask him a question. And it's just this weird, like at any moment, I'm going to die. Other texts were sent out that night. One between 27-year-old Jeff Rodriguez and his brother, with Jeff texting his brother at 2:25 a.m. stating, quote, "I've been shot at the club, dying. I love you, Mom, Pop, and Mary too." Now, this one also really gets me because sadly, Jeff's brother initially believed that his brother, always a prankster, was joking and actually began sending laughing emojis and telling him to cut it out. Jeff's final text to his brother being, "Not a joke. I'm dying. Call Mom and tell her I love her." And it wouldn't be until a while later when news of what happened began getting reported on TV that the full horror set in and his brother realized that he wasn't joking. Again, I can imagine that. Like you think, and it's one of those things, that guilt you feel, but it's like, how could you know? No one expects to, go to a club and then someone just walks in and starts shooting everybody. I honestly probably, well, not now, but back then before this was a thing, been like, are you like, that's a really messed up joke. And then finding out that it really did happen and sadly he did pass away is just, Now, the family of the youngest victim of the Pulse shooting, 18-year-old Akira Murray, shared their final text with their daughter. Akira was at Pulse with two of her friends, all of them there to celebrate having just graduated from high school the month before. Pulse was one of the only bars in the area that allowed underage people to get in, and she begged her parents to let her go despite their hesitation. That night, at just after 2:30 in the morning, she would text them, "Please come get us now, they're shooting." Her parents immediately began to drive there, and along the way they received another call from officers informing them that their daughter didn't make it. And again, the youngest victim just graduated high school. And it's those details in cases we cover where it's just like, because it's so senseless. And as we see by the end of this, it doesn't make sense. There's no point to it. It's so senseless and it's so tragic. And it's just like, why? Why did it have to happen?
Evil people and hate.
And that's it. And you have to think, this was a girl just graduated high school, about to go into the real world. And it's like, let's go celebrate at one of the most beloved clubs. It had a reputation like this is a place to go. Like we can see a drag show, hang out, and just enjoy the fact that we're now adults in the real world. First time going to a bar, and this happens. Now, by the time the sun rose over Orlando, just an hour after police cleared Pulse, news of what happened had already begun spreading, and it was about to change forever. Of the 49 victims of the Pulse massacre, 39 would be pronounced dead at the scene. 20 would be found deceased on the dance floor in front of the main stage, 9 in the men's room, 5 in the women's restroom, 1 on the stage, 1 in the front lobby, and 1 on the patio. At least 5 victims were confirmed to have been killed during the 3-hour hostage situation, causing many to question police action. And I don't think I actually wrote this in here. On top of that, like I said, it took police hours to also clear the scene, and it would be confirmed later on by autopsies that at least 16 victims had potentially wounds that could have been treated if they had gotten to on time. And again, it's one of those things where it's like, this definitely could have been handled better. Now, the Pulse nightclub shooting would go on to become the worst terrorist attack on American soil since 9/11, and the worst attack on the queer community in history, surpassing the 1973 New Orleans upstairs lounge fire. The news of this attack spread across the country like wildfire, as it left the entire community shaken to its core and terrified of what would happen next. Almost immediately, police forces across the country announced that Pride festivities would feature armed police presence, especially in major cities like New York, LA, and New Orleans, which I get the sentiment, but also at the same time,
There's not a really good relationship between most queer communities and the police.
they're not. And most queer people are not going to feel safe or comfortable with all these armed guards standing around them with guns. And it's one of those, still a conversation had to this day.
That is the sad thing because those men are armed to protect the people, but there's been such a history of fear that even with them being there to protect them, a lot of queer people's like, I'm still scared of you.
It is, and it's a really tough and very complex relationship between the queer community and the police, understandably so. You're talking almost a century, even more than a century of bigotry and hatred from police and discrimination. And so, I think it's more than fair that people are weary of a strong police presence at Pride. And even to this day, just last year and I think the year before, here where we are, it was a huge debate about having police at Pride. And it's one of those things where I'm like, I don't know if there's really currently a good solution that's going to satisfy everyone. Memorials were held at both Stonewall and in DC in the days following the shooting, and so many questions lingered as a community attempted to pick up the pieces and try to make sense of what happened. But the sad thing was, it didn't make sense, and it never will. What happened at Pulse was one of the worst senseless acts of violence in recent memory, and no matter the motive, nothing can excuse what Omar Mateen did. Now, Omar himself stated that his motive was in retaliation for U.S. bombs in Syria and that he was a supporter of ISIS, which seems pretty cut and dry. But at the same time, of course, he attacked a gay bar. Of course, there's going to be conversations about did that have anything to do with his motive. Many theories were put forward that he was secretly gay and despised himself over it, taking it out on others. And although there's not 100% concrete physical proof that Omar was gay or like men, various reports would come out stating that he was seen at Pulse over the years, and his own wife would state that she suspected he might be gay. So, whether that has something to do with it will forever remain unknown. And it's one of those things, especially when you have cases where the perpetrator dies before they can be questioned, you're left with this empty hole of why? Like, what specifically was it about this? Like, what happened? Unfortunately, we can't answer that question. I don't want to focus on the shooter too much because this isn't about him. And that's kind of what he wanted, especially because he was like, I'm doing this to protest America, doing this and this. And so he wants to be his story out there as much as possible. So we're not going to give that to him. But as we've said many times over the years, so this episode isn't about him. It's about the lives he destroyed and the community he left in shambles. But as we've said many times over the years, no matter the trials and tragedies thrown at us, the queer community endures. On June 15th of 2016, a citywide blood drive was held in support of the victims still struggling in the hospital, but this also caused controversy as many urged the FDA to lift the ban on gay men giving blood, but they refused. And I don't think a lot of people actually realize that. Like, the wording's not if you're gay, you can't donate blood. The wording is if a man has sex with another man within 6 months, you can't give blood. So if you're gay, you can't give blood. And it's one of those things that's really so weird, especially how far we've come in like testing and all that stuff. And
Is it 6 months, or I thought it was just like if you've ever had sex with.
they updated it. Last I checked, they updated it to 6 months now. So it was period. If you've ever had sex with a man, you can't. I'm pretty sure last time I worked at a hospital, it was if you had sex with a man within the last 6 months, you can't. But if it's been longer than that, you can. But still, it's like all these people that want to give blood and help save people, and you're just like, we don't want it. And there's only really one, I think, good reason why they don't want it, because it's discrimination.
I mean, it started with HIV.
It definitely did, and understandably so with that. But
I mean, the testing and stuff now, I mean, all that blood is tested no matter what.
yeah,
So is originally why, because homosexuals were way more likely to have HIV.
that's definitely the reason why it started. And a lot of people now are like, but we've come so far with testing and stuff like that, like there's no need for this.
And that's true.
But other than this, a GoFundMe was started for the victims' families, raising over $7 million. Another fundraiser campaign was started called One Orlando, which to date has raised over $23 million for the survivors and families of those lost. Most of the medical costs of the victims were also covered by the Crime Victim Compensation Program, although treatment for long-lasting psychological damage was not. Immediately after the area was cleared and reopened to the public, the site of Pulse nightclub was turned into a memorial with thousands of photos, letters, and signs lining the fence that had been erected around the entire building to seal it off. Pulse never reopened its doors after that fateful night. It remained closed and fenced off from the world, a once lively, safe space for queer people of all races to come and celebrate as one, now a somber, sometimes painful reminder of how far hate can go. On November 8th, the city of Orlando announced plans to purchase Pulse and turn it into a permanent memorial, but as of 2025, the city hasn't actually done anything. It's formed an active committee, and it is still in the process of figuring out a plan to demolish the building and build a permanent memorial. The area still acts as a symbol of pride and sees thousands of visitors a year who come to pay their respects. On June 25th, 2021, President Joe Biden declared the site of Pulse a national memorial, something that was also declared unanimously by the House of Congress. On top of this, the city of Orlando also issued June 12th as official Orlando United Day as a day of remembrance. The mayor of Orlando at the time, Buddy Dwyer, went on to state, quote, "We will not be defined by the act of a coward. We will be defined by how we respond to it." And that's exactly what they did. On top of the fundraisers, the blood drives, and the memorials, the spirit of Orlando and the queer community may have been shaken, but it wasn't gone. 11 days after the shooting, the owners of Pulse had one last Latin night in the street outside of the club, an event that drew a crowd of over 1,000 people who came to dance and feel the beat of Pulse one last time. Years later, on the anniversary of the massacre, a survivor named Orlando Torres was interviewed about how he could still go out and visit clubs and bars after what happened, and he summed it up best, quote, "I still go out to nightclubs, and people often ask how I do that knowing the fear of what I went through. And I say, well, I'm a little more observant. I'm always watching people to make sure their pockets aren't bulged out with some kind of weapon. As I've always said, everyone in life has a date, a number where we are all going to expire. I thought mine was coming 3 or 4 times hiding in that bathroom, but it didn't. I was lucky, and so I think it's best to live by the motto that someone else came up with. Keep dancing, Orlando." Even though time passes and physical wounds begin to heal, the painful memories left behind by what happened at Pulse are still ever present in each pride that we celebrate. But along with those painful feelings are also feelings of hope. Hope that we are still here and we aren't going anywhere anytime soon. Before we close out the episode, I do believe it's important to remember the names of those we lost. So we're just going to go down the list. And I'm going to go ahead and apologize. Like I said, 90% of the victims were of Latin descent. We're going to say their names the best we can as hillbilly hill folk.
No disrespect, for real.
Absolutely no disrespect. Stanley Almodovar III, 23.
Amanda Alvear, 25.
Oscar A. Arciana Montero, 26.
Rodolfo Ayala, 33.
Alejandro Martinez, 21.
Martin Benitez Torres, 33.
Antonio Brown, 30.
Daryl R. Burt II, 29.
Jonathan Vega, 24.
Angel L. Candelario Padro, 28.
Simon Carrillo Fernandez, 31.
Juan Chavez Martinez, 25.
Luis D. Conde, 39.
Corey J. Connell, 21.
Tevin E. Crosby, 25.
Frankie J. Jesus Velasquez, 50.
Dionka D. Drayton, 32.
Mercedes M. Flores, 26.
Peter Gonzalez Cruz, 22.
Juan R. Guerrero, 22.
Paul T. Henry, 41.
Juan R. Guerrero, 22.
Paul T. Henry, 41.
Frank Hernandez, 27.
Miguel Onirato, 30.
Javier Jorge Reyes, 40.
Jason B. Josephat, 19.
Eddie J. Justice, 30.
Anthony L. Loriano Disles, 25.
Christopher A. Lononen, 32.
Brenda Marquez McCool, 49.
Juan C. Menendez Perez, 35.
Akira Monet Murray, 18.
Kimberly Morris, 37.
Jean Nieves Rodriguez, 27.
Luis O. Ocasio Capo, 20.
Geraldo A. Ortez Jimenez, 25.
Eric Ivan Ortiz Rivera, 36.
Joel Rayon Penagua, 32.
Enrique L. Rios Jr., 25.
Juan P. Rivera Velasquez, 37.
Yomari Rodriguez Sullivan, 24.
Christopher J. Sanfiles, 24.
Xavier Emmanuel Serrano Rosado, 35.
Gilberto Ramon Silva Menendez, 25.
Edward Sotomayor Jr., 34.
Shane E. Tomlinson, 33.
Leroy Valentin Fernandez, 25.
Luis S. Vilma, 22.
Luis Daniel Wilson Leon, 37.
Gerald A. Rott, 31. We remember you.
That's so many names.
49.
Just saying them out loud took that much time.
And that's not even counting the over 50 wounded, the families of all those victims, the emotional scars they have. And this expands so far beyond. The gunman really did set off a horrible, horrible domino effect. And that's one reason we have to remember things like the Pulse nightclub shooting, and honor the victims, remember the victims, make sure it doesn't happen again, stay alert, but also to remember the tenacity of the queer community and how resilient they are, even in the face of such senseless violence, no rationale behind it. It's one of those things where it's you can ask yourself why a million times, and it's never going to make sense. And really, all we can do is be there for each other in times like this.
I always just think of like each one of those people, their families are never the same.
No. And like I said, especially the ones that were in contact with their loved ones as they were being shot at and they died, you can't imagine the emotional turmoil that has to take on the soul.
And all the people that were there that survived, they're never the same either.
None of the survivors go, and that's it. It was people there just having a good time, celebrating and laughing. And that also gets me is I'm one of those people, like when we are in a situation like that, I always like to just look around and I'm like, in this moment, it is just human beings enjoying the same space together, being around each other. No one's hateful. Everyone's just here for the same reason, which is just to let loose, have fun, and celebrate, pride or whatever it is. And then you're not expecting the worst possible thing to happen and a monster to just so callously come in and destroy not just that, but your entire feeling of safety wherever you go. But I also think it's really important, a lot of people afterwards where it's like, you can't be afraid to live because so many were like, for months afterwards, I didn't want to leave the house. I was terrified to go anywhere. But eventually you do have to, he's like, you can't be afraid to live your life. You got to get out there and live it. Live it for yourself. Live it for them. Do not live life afraid.
Yeah, we all have to die, but living is really the hard part of life. Living a life worth remembering.
And just living a life just to be happy. Do what makes you happy. Be who makes you happy. Love who you want to love. And, you shouldn't be afraid to do that. And it's sad that we even have to have that conversation. But, that's one of the reasons we're here is to remind you that you are loved and to love yourself, as the great Rupel always says. If you can't love yourself, how in the hell are you going to love somebody else? But, it's true. And it's always true to just never let that light dim. Don't let anything bring you down. Don't let anything crush your spirits. Queer community is a community of fighters. They've always been fighters. That's why we always say First Pride was a riot. Stonewall was an uprising. It was because people didn't let years of being oppressed get them down. It was, you can keep trying to knock us down and threaten us and strong arm us into being just like dying off in the shadows, but we're not going to do it. That's what we got to keep remembering. It's just be strong out there because we are all in this together.
And it's a very, very important time to be visible.
It is, especially right now. So much is going on. I'm sure we all heard about what happened with King of the Hill actor Jonathan Joss and his husband's statement stating that it was very much a hate crime because they were yelling slurs as he shot him. And the cops are kind of being like, well, we don't think it's a hate crime necessarily. Or the fact that they are trying to rename the USS Harvey Milk. And it's just, we're in the middle of queer race here, and that can be really scary. But at the same time, do not let it discourage you. And we can't let it discourage us because then they win. Especially this coming Thursday as the 9th anniversary of Pulse comes about. It's going to be a really hard time. If anyone wants to talk about it or remember it, you can always reach us on our socials. I'm usually really quick to respond. And we'll just, it's going to be a hard day, so we'll get through it together. And maybe we'll post some heartwarming posts on Instagram or something that day just to help, remember, but boost the mood a little too. This goes out to all the victims, all those affected by it. Not just that, but everyone affected by it mentally because, it's a scary, terrible thing to hear about something like this happening, especially in your own community. With that, thank you guys again so much for tuning in for another episode. If you enjoyed this episode in the podcast, please leave us a 5-star rating or review on iTunes or Spotify. Helps us out a lot. Helps other people discover the podcast. And of course, we just love hearing from you guys. If you want to see photos from today's case, you can follow us on Instagram at Beers with Queers Pod, that's POD, or on Facebook at Beers with Queers, a true crime podcast. And until next week, happy Pride, y'all. Stay safe and stay dangerous out there.
Have fun. It goes really fast.
It does.